in his areas of interest, namely history of social science, social and intellectual history, journalism and media studies, and colonialism and Malay society. He is a columnist with the National Daily News Straits Times since 2002 and the Bahasa Melayu Opinion and Commentary Monthly Dewan Masyarakat since 2018. I shouldn't take much of his time. Without further ado, may I kindly invite Prof. Ahmad Murad Merican. Please,
Thank
Prof.
you. Thank you, Prof. Zaleha. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And thank you for the invitation for me to speak in the Writing.Lab session. The topic which I'm given is Theorizing Writing, the Intellectual Craftsmanship. I will refer to the work of C. Wright Mills, sociologist in the 50s, not very popular in Malaysia. He has been, in fact, his books, one of his books is The Sociological Imagination. Although having been read and critiqued and reviewed and studied many times over by scholars all over the world, that part of the book, which is titled On Intellectual Craftsmanship, has been undervalued, understated, and much neglected. This part is in the appendix of his book, The Sociological Imagination, 1959, tells us about how to be a scholar, how to apply and how to execute our plans, our thoughts in writing. In other words, it is a pedagogical part of that book which has not been referred to in terms of the practice of social science. And what in Malaysia, this part, in fact, the whole book, the whole project of C. Wright Mills is not referred to by many scholars, not only by sociologists but by many scholars, because in that book he tells us about the discipline of social science, the various dimensions of social science, and how we move into the area or the field of the discipline, and how we argue as a social scientist and a scholar. And also he looked into the various disciplines that are mutually not mutually exclusive to sociology, like history, anthropology, philosophy, that adds and builds up our theoretical initiatives. So I will walk you through this part, but before that, I would I'm reading you a poetry which is titled Theory as Poetry, which contains this part of the appendix, which sums up, which essentializes this part of the appendix on intellectual craftsmanship. I also title it as Theory as Weapon. As students of social science and the humanities, we deal with theory, and we thought that theory is only that part of the thesis, and that the writing of the thesis is that putting words on paper, but it's more than that. The writing of thesis is a tool. It is the production and reproduction of thought, of imagination. It is how you have moved throughout your way with regard to the mapping of the area. We're dealing with a corpus, and therefore you have to know the boundaries of the corpus, the structures of epistemology, and the system of knowledge production, as in what Mills has written. So I'll start with this this poetry. Thinking is a struggle for order and at the same time for comprehensiveness. Thinking of the opposite of that with which you are directly concerned. Orient yourself to the central and continuing task of understanding the structure and the drift that shape and the meanings of your own period. Do not allow public issues as they are officially officially formulated, or troubles as they are privately felt, to determine the problems that you take up for study. Above all, do not give up your moral and political autonomy by accepting in someone else's terms the illiberal practicality of the bureaucratic ethos or the liberal practicality of the moral scatter. And therefore, I'll proceed on the elaboration of this poetry, or of this weapon that we call theory, how we actualize the theory. I'll go through this part. This is about 17 pages. If we cannot finish the session, perhaps if there's time, we can move on to another session. But I would want to walk through this understated, marginalized methodology with regard to how we articulate knowledge. C. Wright Mills began with this statement: to the individual social scientist. By social scientist here, he means scholar, whether you are in the various social sciences, you are in the humanities. And this is important. He mentions this part. And in doing a thesis, you need to internalize, you need to be literate, you need to be engaged where you are located in your discipline, or in the larger discipline, or in your field. You need to know the boundaries. You need to know how to transcend the boundaries. You need to know the mutually exclusive or non-mutually exclusive areas. You need to delve into the origins of disciplines, how disciplines emerge in the modern period, when they became an academic field studied in the universities, how they evolved, what were the sources that were used in the writing of the disciplines, who wrote them, during which period, what were the problems that they were addressing to, what were the empirical focus of the development of the epistemology and the corpus. Would the discipline that you are in exist forever? Would there be a way or a condition in which disciplines fall and disappear and re-emerge and be consolidated? These are the things that you have to know of what you're studying. For example, when does modern sociology begin? Who developed modern sociology? What were the problems that were addressed by modern sociology? In a sense, when I say modern sociology, I would also include Ibn Khaldun. But when I say also modern sociology, I will also include the problems that occurred in modern Europe in the 1800s. And this was when sociology took a turn, a different turn as compared to Ibn Khaldun. And for example, also from sociology, you have the different cognates: anthropology, political science, psychology, economics. These are different cognates from sociology. Because sociology in the 1700s was the queen of the disciplines. It was a period of crisis between religion and secularism. It was the crisis of modern Europe. It was addressing the problems of society, of the monarchy, of the Catholic religion, of the fall of Catholicism and the rise of Protestantism. All these were addressed in that. And what about economics? Again, economics was developed at the time, and how we see the discipline of economics have evolved into this modern period. So again, those were the periods in which disciplines emerged. And disciplines do not come from heaven. They do not descend from heaven. They keep always emerging and re-emerging over the modern period. In fact, over the last century, a number of fields and disciplines emerged as a result of World War II. Sociology took a turn. Communication emerged from the ashes of World War II in 1945-46. The field of cybernetics also emerged as a result of the of intelligence work, coding and decoding of computers and information, bits and bytes. The term bits and bytes came up from cybernetics and cultural studies, apart from the other areas. So you have to know where you are located, how things were started to be studied. So this is important, as if you are engaged with the system of knowledge production, you are engaged with epistemology, you are engaged with how the corpus is produced, how it evolved, then you will feel yourself part of a tradition, part of an intellectual tradition, part of classical tradition, and part of the practice of a craft. And this is where knowledge is not only consumed by you, but it is also reproduced by you as a member of that community or as a member of that intellectual tradition. That's why in the period of, for example, writing a PhD or writing a thesis, maybe 2 years, 3 years, or 4 years, don't take too long. Or for the scholar, in the period throughout his or her life, this is the period in which one consumes and one is part of it. A man or woman at work on problems of substance, he is among those who are quickly made impatient and weary by elaborate discussions of method and theory in general. So much of it interrupts his proper studies. Now, Mills is against this precise rules. I've come across, we have come across, and yourself have experienced when you register yourself as a postgraduate student, you'll be given guidelines, so-called guidelines, how to write a thesis. You'll be given information on the structure of thesis writing. Many of you will get intimidated. Many of you would get intimidated by this section of literature review, another section of methodology, another section on whatever. I think this narrows down and this inhibits your thinking. So what we're saying is that we have to get out of that. We have to transcend that. It is better to have one account by a working student of how he's going about his work than a dozen codifications of procedures by specialists who, as often as not, has never done much work of consequence. In other words, don't be intimidated or don't be intimidated by procedures. procedures of writing a thesis, procedures of method and methodology. To many students that have come across methods and methodologies a bit. It's something that many may not like. By the way, I'm addressing this to those who do, and I'm looking at the non-quantitative side of writing, the non-quantitative side of the thesis, of methodology. Only, this is what Neil says, only by conversations in which experienced thinkers exchange information about the actual ways of working can a useful sense of method and theory be imparted to the beginning student. By conversations here, we do not mean only by talking to one another, having conversations in the coffee house, in the cafes. Of course, nowadays in Malaysia, for example, we cannot dine out. You cannot have discussions outside. So my conversations here will also include oral communication as well as reading of materials, talking to scholars by way of reading, talking to dead people who have died years or centuries ago. So when you read, again, you have to put on a certain mode of engagement with the corpus that you read. So only by conversations with experienced thinkers and exchanging of information, the actual ways of working can be a useful sense of method and theory be imparted to you. So what Neil is saying is that he is now reporting how he goes about doing his craft. And writing, doing a thesis and scholarship is a personal activity. It's a lonely activity. And when we write, we necessarily impart a personal statement. Although when we embark into scholarship, the corpus is not personal. There are things like objectivity, there are things like validity. But on the other dimension, there is this personal approach. There is this personal experience with regard to what one studies and learning from facts and learning from one's own experience. To the beginning student, the most admirable thinkers within the scholarly community have chosen to join do not split their work from their lives. This is one important thing that you have to bear in mind. Whether you are a student or you are a scholar, yes, you separate your work from your life, but at the same time, you do not. Your whole life should inform you of your work or your scholarship. We cannot separate our scholarship and detach objectively what we do from our own experience, from our own interests, from our own tendency, from our own orientation. People seem to take both too seriously to allow such dissociation, and they want to use each for the enrichment of the other. Of course, I'm reading from Mills. Of course, such a split is the prevailing convention among us in general, deriving, I suppose, from the hollowness of work which we in general do now. he was criticizing or making a statement on modern life, how hollow work seems to be, perhaps except for scholarly work. But you will have to recognize that as a scholar, you have the exceptional opportunity of designing a way of living which will encourage the habits of good workmanship. As a scholar, and as a student, also as a person who has chosen scholarship as a vocation, one has autonomy. Even when I say autonomy, even the vice chancellor or the dean cannot tell us what to do. One has the opportunity to design one's life and one's work. Scholarship is a choice of how to live as well as a choice of a career. And it is not only a career, it is a vocation. It is beyond a career. Whether we know about it or not, the intellectual workman forms his or her own self as he works toward the perfection of his craft. To realize his own potentialities and any opportunities that come his way, he constructs a character which has its core the qualities of a good workman. Some people compare this workmanship or this craftsmanship to a carpenter. You know, we work in a lab, or we work in a workshop, or we have a bench and we have our tools. So in the modern condition, our tools would be whatever that we have used, laptop, paper, still is a tool, pen and pencil are still tools. And most of all, to remind, theories are tools to understand the world. What this means is that you must learn to use your life experience in your intellectual work, because intellectual work does not come in a vacuum. Intellectual work is informed by the life experience, not only of a person, not only of the individual, but of a community, a society, or of a nation. For example, this morning there was a defense proposal. I was commenting on a project that wants to study on a person living in the Maghreb, North Africa and Morocco. And I said that when we study Maghrebi society, when we study North African society, when we study the phenomenon in North Africa in the modern period, over the last 200 years or 300 years, especially since the 1800s, we have to go back to France. France as a personality, France as a nation, France as a community, because the experience of France in colonizing other lands, the experience of France in configuring on Islam and on Muslim society is important. And many of the North African intellectuals either would have been educated in France, being embedded in French epistemology and the French worldview, and embedded in French philosophy. And we got to know that when that happens, we've got to look at the context of the French state, France as an ethnographic state. So when we look at France as an ethnographic state, we look at France as a personality doing ethnography on Islam and on Muslim societies. So the experience, the life experience of colonial France is critical for us to understand, for example, the divisions and structures of society in North Africa. And this is very peculiar to that region vis-a-vis France. To some extent too, for those in Malaysia or in India, perhaps we got to study British society, or for those who want to study Indonesian society, you got to look at the Dutch. Much of Dutch sources are until now, or until recently, not privy to our scholars here, to the Dutch scholar or to the scholar of Indonesia. One of which is because of the language, the other is because of other forms of inaccessibility. So the life experience, your life experience determine how you think and what you write. So, and this continually examines and interprets. So, what is meant that you must learn to use your life experience in your intellectual work, which continually examines yourself and interprets yourself with regard to how you interpret others, how you interpret social phenomena, how you interpret other societies. And interpretations are subjective, intersubjective. You got to think of objective values as problematic. You got to problematize facts, because facts are also invented. They are invented in the modern period as a result of the process of history, as a result of revolutions as a result of the scientific revolution, from Baconin science, and how Baconin science emphasizing on empiricism, emphasizing on the separation of values from phenomena, configure upon how we interpret things. In this sense, craftsmanship is the center of yourself, and you are personally involved in every intellectual product upon which you work. To say that you can have experience means one thing, that your past plays into and affects your present, your past. Your past could be your personal past, would be your experience with your family, your experience with your colleagues, your experience with your schooling. So all this plays into and affects your present. What you are in the present is what you have gone through the past. And in writing, one of the better ways of writing his thesis is to write something close to you, something close to your rational heart, not to your rational mind. Plus, you can write anything in the thesis, but something close to you, something intimate that perhaps you would want to produce, that you are belaboring to produce. It is labor. Writing is labor in any form. It's not just putting words on paper or words on the screen. It's labor. I'm a writer. I write every day. I write columns. I write books. I write journals. Every day is a labor that one has to produce, and it's recurring as long as you live, as long as we subscribe to our vocation. It becomes a recurring phenomenon. It's not just having done with the labor and that's it. So it's like being pregnant, and this is kind of recurring pregnancy with regard to what we produce. As a scholar, you have to control this rather elaborate interplay of work, of experience, of past and present. And this experience may not be having a traumatic kind of life. Trauma does not mean tragedy. Certainly, it does not mean the Greek tragedy. Trauma means something that you engage in, that becomes a problem for you. So there is this interplay to capture what you experience and to sort it out. We capture the experience, even fringe thoughts. You capture what you see, and seeing is important. And seeing is not only a routine experience when people who are not blind, or even people who are blind, they see with their heart. But people like us, we see. But I'd like to tell you one episode. I was reading an industry magazine produced by car makers. And we assume that people who make cars, these are fantastic. They just unthinkingly they produce cars, assemble, and that's it, you buy. But this magazine, I found a quote. It says, what we see changes who we are. What we see changes who we are. And this becomes truer and truer as the day passes by, actually. It becomes truer and truer from the moment we see with our naked eyes to the advent of television, to the advent of the social media. Every day we see things, every day we see different things. And that psychologically, socially, culturally, philosophically change. It would change the generation that is exposed to these things the moment they were born. If we look at the emergence of the internet from 1996, those who were born or those who were views, they were woken by the internet from 1996. These were the people who would change themselves. And the phrase disturbed me. It lingered in my mind until one day I discovered where the editor of the magazine, of the car maker, got it. He got it from Jalaluddin Rumi, from the Masnavi. So here, again, the car maker knows it's not just making cars, but the car maker knows the value of sight and the value of seeing and the value of how it changes. But Jalaluddin Rumi, definitely would have consciousness of what he means in terms of what we see changes who we are. So here, with regard to scholarship and with regard to sight, with regard to what we will do in intellectual work, seeing itself is a great thing. Seeing itself should be consumed with magnitude daily in our lives. Even encountering a bird flying across us is a phenomenon that is worth putting in our thesis. These are things that should guide us, where we capture experience, we capture what we see, and we sort them out. Only this way can we hope to use it as a guide and test our reflection, and in the process shape ourselves as an intellectual craftsman. So it is the reflective process, and that reflective process should consciously shape ourselves. Of course, we are shaped by the interplay of forces. But what's important here as a scholar, that we are conscious that we are shaped by this interplay of forces. And that makes us a better scholar. But how can we do this? Ask Mills. Or Mills asked us, how can we do this? One answer is, he says, we must set up a file, which he supposes is a sociologist's way of saying, keep a journal. We keep a file, keep a journal. Many creative writers keep journals. The sociologist's need for systematic reflection demands it. And this is very important. Before 1996, when we say keeping a file, we literally keep a file. And especially in systematic kind of writing, in producing your thesis, each file should reflect a chapter or parts of a chapter. In this case, as we go along, and that's why reading is important. Nowadays, I find that the supervision in many social scientists do not require rigorous reading. But reading takes place from day one till the last day, until a viva. In reading, you capture things, you keep files, and you identify the materials that you want to use in the chapters that you are planned into. In other words, you have to plan the chapters, you have to plan the nature of the chapters, and then you got to keep that file. So in the present form in the computer, you have online files. So have files for different parts of your thesis and deposit your materials there. In such a file, as Mills described it, there is a joint personal experience and professional activity. Your professional experience, your professional activity, your personal experience, studies underway, and studies planned. In this file, you as an intellectual craftsman will try to put together what you are doing intellectually and what you are experiencing as a person. Well, whether you have your file in your handphone, or your file in a laptop or an iPad, or your file in a notebook like this. I used to keep this notebook when I was every day till now, especially when I was doing a PhD, in my pocket. And whenever I have thoughts, I'll capture in my notebooks. Fringe thoughts that generally you pass off as worthless, subconscious responses. You have to be conscious of that subconscious response in you. So in order to be conscious, in order to capture that subconscious response, the left side of the brain, we capture that in your file. And here you will not be afraid to use your experience and relate it directly to various work in progress. So this file is important. You can capture in words, you can capture in drawing, you can capture in mind mapping, whatever. But this is the capturing of both the right side of the brain, the normally orthodox conscious brain, and the left side of the brain. Normally, we take it as the subconscious one. By serving as a check on repetitious work, your file always enables you to conserve your energy. It also encourages you to capture fringe thoughts. I've said fringe thoughts, and fringe thoughts are important. Fringe thoughts keep your writing going. Fringe thoughts become the pivot, the fulcrum, the link between one thought or one idea to another. Fringe thoughts protect you against forgetting the link, against any missing link. Fringe thoughts enable you to capture the moment, to capture the network, to map the system. So it is important to have that systemic thinking, not systematic, but systemic thinking with regard to the obvious and the ephemeral existences that you encounter in yourself, or perhaps overheard a conversation from people near you. You got to do some spy work. For example, you sit in a cafe or in a cafeteria or mama shop, whatever. You will hear the clatter. You will hear the cacophony. But then sometimes your ears will focus on something that people talk about. It is not eavesdropping. This is not spying on others. Perhaps this is perhaps a natural way in which you position yourself. You naturally would tend to hear. If it's valuable, keep it and capture it. It's for your own use, not to destroy others. So fringe thoughts, various ideas which may be byproducts of everyday life. So byproducts of everyday life can be anything. It can be the food that you eat. Perhaps thinking of the recipe of what makes a dish taste so good, which may help you in your thesis, perhaps. Or suddenly, for example, looking at birds. I have the experience of suddenly I saw a flock of birds pushing away smaller birds. In racing enggang sama enggang, pipit sama pipit. The larger birds would not mix with the older with the smaller birds. The smaller birds would fly away from the larger birds. I saw this literally in one of those days when I was looking up near my house. I'm staying, in the fringe of a forest. So I saw these things, except for tigers, which are also, their path from along the peninsula. Snatches of conversation overheard, as I said, on the street, in the cafeteria, in class, of fundamental dreams. Again, have a notebook, or have something that we can record beside the bed. Once noted, this may lead to a more systematic thinking, as well as lend intellectual relevance to more directed experience. You will also often notice how carefully accomplished thinkers treat their own minds. Now, in writing, you not only have to be conscious of what you see or what you read, but conscious of the way you think, of how you think. Step outside your mind, have a reflector, and look inside it. And this is how for example, sociologists or anthropologists or political scientists study. When you want to study people, you have this ethic and emic. You have this, looking from inside society or looking from outside society. When we're into the discourse of, say, Orientalism, again, you may think, or you may want to think, you may want to delve into of how a European thinks about Islam and about non-Europeans. And you may want to think about how you think from inside. But of course, you've got to be conscious that your thoughts and your orientation are not Europeanized or are not Orientalized. So again, this ability to segregate your values and the context of what you think is important. So thinking from inside in and outside in and inside out and outside out are some of the approaches in which you understand your own minds. When I say you understand your own minds, I'm not talking about the meaning of mind as in the Cartesian sense of the word. In the Cartesian sense of the word, mind will exclude any form of emotion. But in the non-Cartesian, in the Malay sense of the word, in the sense of Buddhi, mind also includes the rationality of the heart. In the Cartesian sense, rationality is of the mind. Reason is of the mind. But in the Malay sense, for example, when you talk about reason, when you talk about rationality, it is also a dimension of the emotion, a dimension of what we call the Buddhi. So here I'm being alert of what I'm giving you. Mills was American. He grew up in the milieu of Euro-American thought, and he was a Marxist. By Marxist here, I don't mean the gun-carrying Marxist. There are many ways to look at Marxism. Perhaps another lecture would make you aware of what a Marxist means. There are many Marxist scholars, especially after World War II, who have used the approaches of Marxism to understand society, to be critical of society. And they are not the Marxists that, or rather the leftists that occurred after the French Revolution. They were not the leftists that emerged after the Bolshevik Revolution, but they were leftists that emerged after World War II. So there are many shades of the left and many shades of Marxism. So this author, C. Wright Mills, is one shade that we see among many scholars until now, especially that arose from the 1940s and 50s. The reason why we should treasure, or they treasure, their smallest expectations or experiences is that in the course of a lifetime, modern man has so very little personal experience, and yet experience is so important as a source of original intellectual work. This is important. Again, we question how much originality do we want or do we expect? And how much original work do we want to present in our thesis? Or do we want to pretend that we have written in our thesis? Again, I leave it to you. What is original? What is new? And what is novel? Again, a thesis doesn't look for the simple meaning of novel or newness or originality. Originality can come in many forms. It can come in many ways. If you were to read the works of Edward Said, his many works, especially the book covering Islam, how the media and others determine how we see the rest of the world. Chapters 2 and 3 of his work talks about interpretation. And he's aware that in covering Islam 1983, he seems to defend Islam. Yes, he is defending Islam, but he admitted that he is a Christian, but he defends Islam, and he has interpreted many things. What he says is not original, but what he says about interpretation is important. That you go through in terms of how you want to forward what you observe of phenomenon. To be able to trust, yet to be skeptical of your own experiences. Trust, but be skeptical. And here, knowledge, modern, secular, human knowledge, have its shelf life. Not only the sciences, but also in the social sciences. Whatever becomes knowledge, whatever is believed to be true scientifically, may not be true now. One good example is the vaccine for COVID. I'll be getting my jab tomorrow. The vaccine for COVID is valid, it's effective under certain conditions that we are experiencing now. Therefore, it is true. We can trust the vaccine within these conditions. But we cannot trust the same vaccine if we were to take it 2 or 3 years down the line. So again, an example is in anthropology, for example. I used to read anthropology journals in the 1900s and published in the 1900s. And in some of the journals, it was stated that the Japanese originated from Southeast Asia. Ethnically, the Japanese are Malays. Culturally, they're Chinese. This was purportedly, this was the science in the early 1900s, published, validated by anthropologists, by the community of anthropologists in America, and Japan, and all over the world. But if you ask the Japanese now, they would say that they don't believe that anymore. So the belief declined. So again, and you can find many examples in the history of science of the shelf life of knowledge, not only in science, in physical sciences, but in the social sciences as well. So don't trust. Have some doubt in what you learn. Have some doubt in what you receive from your professors. Even for me, what I say may not be valid 50 years from now, or even 10 years from now, I don't know. Because time, you have to look at the factor of time. Time evolves, yeah, but time is also compressed. Time changes. Even our notions of time has got to change. So don't trust time. Don't trust the books that you read. Don't trust the scholars that you read. Because there will be, over time, you yourself perhaps, or other scholars that would question, would subvert, would challenge the scholarship that you are engaged in. So scholarship, in a sense, have its shelf life. So be skeptical of your own experience in what you learn and what you know. And this is the mark of a mature scholar. If a scholar were to trust his or her knowledge in the absolute sense of the word, that scholar is dead, even though physically he or she may be alive. So this ambiguous confidence, I would say, there must be some kind of ambiguity, some kind of ambivalence. This ambiguous confidence is indispensable to originality in any intellectual pursuit. And the file is one way in which you develop and justify your confidence. Why is that? Because by keeping an adequate file, you develop self-reflective habits. You need to have a lot of self-reflection. You can learn how to keep your inner world awake. Whenever you feel strongly about events or ideas, you must try not to let them pass from your mind, but instead formulate them for your files, and in so doing, draw out the implications, show yourself how sometimes foolish these things are, how unproductive they can be, or how they may be articulated into productive shape. The file also helps you, or should help you, to build up the habit of writing. Why I say the habit of writing? This is perhaps a common problem among postgraduate students. The ability to, the facility to write. But I will always tell them, just write. And write every day. Your KPI is to write something every day. I do that. I write something every day because I have a column to meet every week. So I have a column every week. I have a column every month. On top of that, I have a manuscript to work on. I have journal papers to craft. So write every day. You cannot start writing if you do not write something. Mills says that at least every week. I would say every day, as a student and also as a scholar. In developing the file, you can experiment as a writer and thus develop your powers of expression and articulation. So in writing a thesis, you are engaged in a control experience, but initially you don't control. Initially, you've got your thoughts free. You got to transcend the rigidities. You got to transcend the procedures. You got to transcend what your professors of methodology says. You got to transcend what your professors of theory says. You got to transcend what your professors of history says. Because it's not just what they say, actually. It's how you engage yourself. It's how you experience and experiment with what they say. As you move along, toward the end, you come to a piece of work which is more controlled, more, as I've said, or as Mills said, more crafted. That's why it's called the intellectual craftsmanship. It's a craft. Writing is a craft. Any form of writing, whether it's popular writing or it's academic or scholarly writing, but even if there's a difference between writing a thesis and writing a journal and writing a column. But even writing a column, when you read newspaper, certain parts of the newspaper appeal to the scholar. This is called the op-ed or the opinion piece. This is where not everybody can write and not everybody will read. This is where we call it a scholarly informed commentary. And this is what is lacking in our consciousness, and in Malaysia, this is what is lacking in our in the discourse that we put. Our journals lack pieces of writing that we call essays or reflections. Our journals only accept empirically focused research articles. That's one thing. But we need to have also an outlet in our journals which cater for reflective essays. And essays are important. So when you write, do not think of what you're writing for a thesis as thesis writing. Think of it as an essay. The whole thesis are essays put together, are coherent essays that inform the world about what you want to inform the world. So this is again a kind of interplay, a kind of ambivalence, a kind of ambivalent control in your experience. Look at your thesis as the play of essays, whereby you seriously articulate what you want the world to see. I suppose that's about it. I will end at this point. There are many more, but I think this is enough for today. I invite questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Murad. Thank you, Prof. Murad. I wanted to give you a pre-warning at 4, but I thought it's good for me to learn as well from your experience. I think it's more than 40 years experience, isn't it? Of thinking and putting your thoughts into words, as you mentioned that these are not just thoughts into words, but the process of putting the thoughts into and the whole thing, the whole gamut of thing that comes in, you know, the everything that you mentioned just now.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to summarize it because I guess we have many questions which the students would love to hear from you. Can we start the ball rolling, Brother Shahran?
Yeah, yes, Prof. Yeah, they can ask directly or they can write on the chat box.
Yeah.
Yeah, if they want to ask, we can raise hand, we can unmute.
Okay.
Yeah, you can ask me anything.
Yeah.
I have passed over the technology to Brother Shahran to assist me.
Inshallah.
You know, have you received any, Brother Shahran?
Not yet, Prof.
Direct questions or hands up or through chat box?
We have not received any question.
I saw many coming in late as well. Even
okay, while waiting for the questions, can I just continue a bit?
Please.
I would. This is mainly for the social sciences. It would be distracting if while doing your thesis you get funding. Unless you are engineering or other disciplines that need equipment, then that's fine. But when I say funding here, I mean funding that because funding is something that encumbers thought. You would have to think of the funder, you have to think of reporting the expenditure and so on. So try to avoid some kind of systematic funding to your work in the humanities or whatever. It doesn't take much. If you control your sources, you control your work, that'd be better. Don't be encumbered by, as I've said, others. You are the autonomous self. You're not governed by any bureaucratic procedures except for the grad school, except for the university, but you're not governed by other bureaucratic procedures and other financial constraints. Yeah.
Prof, there are at the moment I saw in the chat box 2 questions. Did you?
Yeah. Okay.
You want to answer that first from?
Okay. I will read out. This from Nuruddin. Okay. Nuruddin says it is interesting when you give an example of Edward Said's work. Said, for example, gave rise to a new discourse which at that time was strange in the Western academic tradition, namely about criticism of Orientalism, including criticism of Zionism. My question is how to defend such an idea in an academic culture that tends to consider strange and even hostile to such new ideas. Maybe you can share your experience in writing these decolonizing themes. Thank you. Okay, good question. Again, 2 days back, I received a posting on the phenomenon of the problem of peer reviewing, and this guy says that now we practice, and especially in so-called index. I say so-called because I'm skeptical of these things. I'm not a fan of index journals or journals that are indexed under Scopus or ISI or whatever. And what's important is peer review. Okay? Again, we have to take peer review, as a process, but we have to be wise in peer review. If we give a new idea, if our peers do not accept that new idea will be hidden, will be destroyed, will not be known, will not be published, will not be read, will not be great. So again, what Said did was to, he was not the first to identify the phenomenon of Orientalism. One of the earlier ones was Abu Lughut, who talked about the production of knowledge from the west to the east. So this has been a one-way traffic, and there are various stages of Orientalism from early on, 1500 until now. Now it's called modern Orientalism. And what Said did, Said was fortunate. He published Orientalism in the West, in New York, 1977. And that book was not only published, but was read, was discussed, was debated, was reviewed, and that created a mood of criticism. It spawned a new culture. It spawned a new area, which we now call post-colonialism, which we now call cultural studies, which we now call decolonized studies or post-colonial studies, and which has benefited many students and scholars over the last 40 years. So again, how to defend this idea? In Malaysia, I have my doubts. It's not that it's difficult, but it's because of the ignorance of many members of the academic community. They would say, for example, where's the benchmark? I mean, this is based on my experience. What's the benchmark in terms of, many years back, I was proposing a policy on science communication. This was in the 80s to some people in the Ministry of Science and some stakeholders. The first question they asked was, what's the benchmark? It was an irritating, annoying question. Because at that time, we already had a science policy. To actualize one of the things in science policy is to have an orientation, strategy, and a policy on science communication. While we are having this problem with COVID and this vaccination information on COVID and the vaccination, is because we do not have a strategy on science communication. We have not developed that. We have not accepted work on that to be developed, which I was working on in the 80s. And only now, one of the universities in Malaysia is developing a master's degree on science communication. I hope it gets through. But what's important here is the idea of science communication be embedded within the science policy and within the consciousness of Academy Science Malaysia. So how do we get these ideas over? It's difficult. You've got to lobby. You've got to overcome this hostility, and you've got to write. In other words, you regardless of whatever, you've got to make yourselves known. And over the last 20 years, it's quite easy to get yourselves known. Just put your experience in the social media. Use Facebook. I don't have Instagram, I don't know. But I use Facebook as a public medium. Use Facebook and use WhatsApp as a tool for you to advocate what you want others to pick up from you. And I've done that. I've been doing that for over the last 20 years, and it works. So but I'm not saying that I've overcome, but I'm Penang and Kedah, which is difficult to get by, even among historians. But I've worked on it over the last 20 years. Through a litany of writings, through a litany of speaking engagements, and through my comments in the WhatsApp, petitions, you got to be an advocate. And I would say how he did that is also he was a scholar, at the same time he was partisan. He was, he was involved in the PLO. Some call him a gun-carrying terrorist. In fact, he was spied upon. He was surveyed by Israeli and American intelligence, by the CIA. He was asked to resign from Columbia University, but he advocated. And all of science books, except for the first two, perhaps, I will look at it in one way. One of Joseph Conrad, the other is on the beginnings. But from Orientalism to culture and criticism to understanding Islam and a few others, those are works of advocacy. And when we write, we advocate. Of course, there must be issues to advocate, but this is one way in which writing and advocacy can be together. Because when you write, when you have a thesis, when all of you are focusing or thinking of a thesis, you are advocating a thesis. Perhaps not to the world, but to your supervisor and to your examiners especially. So this advocacy is important. This is what Syed did until he died in 2003, I think. He was advocating at the expense of his family, at the expense of his life. And there was this, coincidentally, I'm reading his latest autobiography by Brennan. Excellent autobiography. You can know a lot of things about his demeanor and about the ideas that he spawned, about the problems that he has. even when he was in Palestine, one time during the Intifada, he threw a stone. It's not just merely throwing a stone, he was making a statement. But that was an advocacy that he did that was known, because when he was throwing a stone, somebody took a photo, and that photo was viral among hostile people, and they wanted him to be sacked and to be reprimanded. So this is how you have to do. Be an advocate. Sometimes you have to use guerrilla tactics intellectually, not carrying a gun. But as I've said, use theory as a weapon, not theory as something that you lift from a book, from your textbook chunks, and for your just to embellish it, to frame it in your research, but formalize it as a weapon. Yeah. There's another one. It's interesting that you point out the influence of funding on the writer scholar.
Yeah.
Yeah. Insofar as it may hinder intellectual independence. In your opinion, should learning institutions refrain from government funding or any other large institution for its funding? What is the ideal way to generate funding for the educational institution without compromising independence? Well, yeah, funding is important. I'm not saying that it's not important. But the manner in which funding is organized, the manner in which funding is made accountable. Okay? My experience is that I'm averse to funding. I don't like funding. Very few of my research are funded. Now I'm by default I'm leading a small research by funding in ISTAC. Before this, I had several hundred thousand funded research. I had a good RA and RO, and we work on that. But still, things may obliterate, obstruct. So, if one were to have funds, then one needs to have a good management of those funds within the research team. So it's not that to refrain from government funding, but it's on how the funding is managed. It's on how the researcher is administratively independent of the funding, of the reporting of the funding. This is what I mean. But of course, if you are in certain disciplines that need a lot of funds, we can't help it. But in the social, ideological sciences, in the human, in the other humanities, generally, people may argue against me, but very little funding is needed. It's basically for logistics purposes. Unless, of course, if we do a nationwide study, survey, then you need a lot of funding. But for the humanities, for library work, for example, and this is where I think I would like to remind postgraduate students, you do not use the library only for a certain part of your thesis. Use the library throughout, because again, you can do your thesis by 100% library work without having to do field work at all. Perhaps field work of say 10 or 20% is to fill up that gap. But what I see now, especially in areas like communication, sociology, the political sciences like political science, there's a lot of field work, and therefore when you do field work, you may lose a lot of things. You capture data, yes. But one of my criticisms of recent scholarship is that, and this goes beyond the writing of thesis, is the poor production of concepts and theory. By that I mean, if you have to produce concepts and theory, we have to go through, and we have to read through, re-examine, re-evaluate previous concepts and theories. our theory building is poor. There is this poverty, and it would be good if in postgraduate would also some of you were to embark on theorizing on society, and there's huge potential in theorizing our society. By our, I mean non-Western societies, because we have been fed by those external to our being, external to our culture, external to our history, that attempts to theorize our society, and we become the second-rated researcher. If we collaborate, generally, if a Malaysian university, if Malaysian scholars collaborate with Western scholars, the Malaysian scholar will be the second-rate scholar. The theory formulator will be those from the West. This is a very tragic thing to happen, and hopefully, postgraduate students from non-Western societies de-link in a way from the epistemologies of epistemological orthodoxy, from knowledge production in the social sciences. Because again, I want to mention here that social science, as in the social sciences in Malaysia, over the last 30 or 40 years or 50 years, is Euro-American social science. We have taken it lock, stock, and barrel and reproduce it to our students, and use those things in our thesis, which is worthless in terms of knowing our society. We have not restructured the curriculum. We have not rearranged the corpus. We have not examined the epistemology, and this is something that we have to do, even in law, and even in the conception of literature and history. We take, of course, it's important to look at ranking history, but it's so important to re-examine works of history from a local perspective. I'm not talking about studying ranking history from a local perspective, but looking at literary works that are historical in a sense, or can be a source for indigenous, can be a source for national, can be a source for our own history, and this needs to be embraced and not neglected, and not consumed to be tales of fantasy and myths, as the colonialists would say and describe, of tales and indigenous works produced in the Malay Archipelago, for example, and also other parts of the world. Yeah.
Yeah, Prof. As much as I like to continue the session, it seems that there are questions coming in, and since we have to stop at 4:30, if you don't mind, continuing your session somewhere in June, Prof.
Yeah, I will pick up from where I left today.
Yeah. It's a continuation rather than coming out with a new topic, because it seems that students warming up to your ideas after perhaps half an hour of you talking, because I think they are trying to understand what you're trying to tell them, because your way of approaching theorizing the pieces, or what you mentioned, for example, theorizing the society, is a concept which is perhaps beyond the reach of students who are still thinking basically how to move on beyond their proposal, Prof. I find that quite daunting, because perhaps after they finish their first draft of thesis writing, they may want to go beyond what you have proposed them to do, which is very difficult actually. If I am a new PhD student, I find this like, I'm still groping in the dark. I can't see a light at the end of the tunnel, and you want me to like jump and do some other things beside the very basic of just putting my thoughts into like thoughts into black and white, which is quite difficult actually. But once you got hold of some important ideas, especially in your area, Prof, on colonization, on things which are to me, knowing you, although for a short while, I knew that you are another breed of scholars, where nobody dares to just say A and expect A to be swallowed by you. So it's good if we can end here for a while.
Prof. Zaleha, can I just briefly?
Yeah.
I missed this comment by Nuruddin.
Yeah.
He asked on the live experience.
Yeah.
Does live here means that we have a close relationship with the theme spiritually? Yeah, live here means.
What was the question, Prof? I did not see the chat. I did not.
Okay, I just noticed it. I think I have to be justice to the person.
Yeah. Can you read his chat?
He says, I want to ask whether the sociological imagination is that research is actually an expression of our existential experiences.
All right.
And it is said that it is important.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, to make life experience the foundation of research. Thus, life here means that we have a close relationship with the theme spiritually. Example, Palestine, even though we have never been to the area. Or do we have to experience it directly as understood in the classical anthropographic method? Okay, what I mean by live experience, it's actually consciousness, being mindful. Okay? What the Buddha says, what Muhammad says, what Rumi says, being mindful of ourselves, being mindful of what we see, being mindful of what we touch, and being mindful of what we say. So here, it is the consciousness of that being, the consciousness of that rationality, and the consciousness of how we think. So we need not be there, but then we perhaps need to have some, quote unquote, as what the writer says, perhaps a spiritual engagement with what we do. This is where, I'm not talking about spirituality in the theological sense of the word. We're talking about spirituality in the spiritual sense of the word. I'll give an example. I've been reading the book by Baginski, titled The Heritage of Traditional Malay Literature. It's a tome. It's about 800 pages or 900 pages thick or more. Baginski is Russian. He is a SOAS professor. But reading the book on Malay literature, and he writes about Rome and the spirituality of the Malay kinship. Reading it, it's as if, and he's not Muslim, it's as if Baginski has a metaphysical, spiritual knowledge of the Malays, which no Malay scholar has ever engaged and manifested. So this is what I mean. Similarly, when you talk about Edward Said, that's why Edward Said in his books, he always mentions secular history. He does not want to get into trouble with the Muslim Mullah. So he said he's observing into the secular history. But Said has a spiritual relationship with the Palestinians, with non-Western society. So by spiritual here, I mean the engagement, the logic, and the reasoning in a combination of ways as a scholar. Yeah, so I think that's essentially how I would respond to your comments and question, Rudy. Thank you.
Perhaps in our next session, Prof, we can go deeper into this, I may call it intellectual exercise, but you have decided to use a different term than intellectual exercise, of which you say this is, you use the term spiritual. Intellectual exercise seems to be a term which is like scratching on the surface.
Yeah.
Perhaps there are other terms which would describe what you intend to share with us. Therefore, I would appeal to all our participants today, those who have joined us earlier at 3 o'clock, or those who have join us at 3:30, or some have joined, I saw, at 3:45, or even some have joined at 4 o'clock, Prof. For them to view the recording in ISTAC's Facebook, there is a recording, and then to join us on time. I am still trying to find time with Prof. Murad. The next time he comes in, perhaps somewhere in June, Prof.
Yeah, sure.
Can't give the timing now. I would remind Brother Shahran to remind all those who are interested to follow this program. But I realize that we have a steady stream of followers to this program. And I would like to say thank you very much to everybody, especially to Prof. Murad for sharing his time here with us, sharing not just his thoughts, I believe his belief as well on not just writing a thesis for the sake of intellectual exercise, but sharing with the world, if not with just a supervisor, with the world on the experiences of the thesis writer on whatever area that had been chosen. So with that, thank you, Prof, and hope to meet all our students again in the next meeting somewhere in June. And Brother Shahran has given as well Brother Shahran, can you show that again in the chat box? Can you show that again in the chat box where students can have access to ISTAC Facebook?
Yeah, yes, Prof.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that I end and pass over to Brother Shahran. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you so much, Prof. Bro, can we decide last Friday next June? Just like that?
Next June. Yeah,
last
okay,
Friday.
inshallah.
Yeah, I mean, we will decide later on if we can change it, but for now.
But tentatively will be last Friday of
next
the
June.
month.
Next month, yeah. Okay, inshallah.
Next
Same
month.
time. Inshallah.
The last Friday of June.
Yeah, inshallah. We will see the date.
Okay, Prof. Can you give us the access to ISTAC Facebook, especially for those outside ISTAC? Can they have access to the Facebook?
Yeah, I already posted on the chat box.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Prof.
Sharon. Thank you, Brother
Yeah,
Sharon.
inshallah.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah, assalamualaikum.
Enjoy your weekend, Prof.
Okay.